Okay, so I think we're set for the recording. So just some logistics about the meeting. We have a panel presentation that we'll go through. It'll take about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a general question and answer period after that. So we'd like to ask you that during the panel presentations to remain mute yourself, and then also turn off your video so that our panelists aren't distracted. Please feel free at any time if you have a question that pops into your head during the panel discussions, please put that in the chat and we'll be sure to ask that question to the panelists at the end of their talks. So just for those of you who are new to the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative, the collaborative is a group of volunteer members that are made up mainly of state and private university representatives, nonprofit and for-profit groups, national estuarine programs and estuarine reserves, state agencies, municipalities, regional and local planners. And it was set up after Sandy to be a bridge between federal and state resilience action and planning to local community planning. And so in that light, the collaborative has established these coffee chats as a way to share information with interested stakeholders in the local communities on what the state's activities have been in regards to resilience planning and implementation, and what the communities are doing. And so today what we have for you is a panel of community members who have led resilience action in their communities. And so we really hope that this not only creates a learning exchange between different community members, but also provides inspiration to do your own resilience planning and projects. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ed Mahoney, and he'll introduce our panel. Oops.
Ed, you're muted still.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us for this second coffee chat. Based on the feedback from your evaluations of the first coffee chat back in September, we have made some adjustments to facilitate a more efficient and effective program and also allow you to obtain the objectives that you really wanted to see. And the first objective was you wanted to see some programming that had been in the process of planning and implementation. And so we have 3 New Jersey towns today who are working towards coastal resilience, and you're going to see 3 models of this. And the second objective of today's meeting is to provide a more networking opportunity for the members of the coastal communities. Today we have the 3 presenters, and I'm going to introduce them all at one time and in the order in which they're going to make their presentations. First, we have Mr. Caleb Stratton from the city of Hoboken. Caleb is the business administrator and chief resilience officer in Hoboken. Welcome, Caleb, and thank you for making the time to be here today and take part in the preparation sessions.
It's a privilege. Thanks for the invitation, Ed. Thank you.
Second, we have Mr. Tom Flynn from the Township of Woodbridge. And Tom is the floodplain administrator, although I know he does much more than that up in Woodbridge. And thirdly, we have Miss Angela Andersen. Angela is with Long Beach Township, and she's the sustainability coordinator. And again, she does far more than that. She keeps the township running. And I'll tell the mayor that, Angela. So, but what I wanted to point out as we move forward here, I personally am very pleased, as well as professionally pleased, that we have these 3 presenters, because these are 3 individuals who can speak from firsthand experience, having orchestrated the planning and the implementation in response mainly to Sandy and kept it going because they understand the importance of sustainability and resiliency. And among the 3 of them, they have taken all the progressive steps, adopted new technology, and come up with very creative ideas which have been implemented. So I think we have an opportunity to learn something from each one of them, regardless of our individual backgrounds, the size of the towns we come from, and the problems that face us. And on that note, we'll go over to Caleb, and Caleb, we can begin with you.
All right. Thanks very much, Ed, for that introduction. This is probably the best part of my day and most fun part of my day. This is getting to talk shop with people who are interested in the topic and my background. And I see Nick Angeron's name pop up as I start talking. So a lot of familiar names on the call. And it's just a privilege to be here, and it's exciting to talk about these things in the context of not having to speak to necessarily an elected official or the community, and kind of just give you the landscape that I'm operating in right now. I did not start out as a business administrator, so my background's in planning. I have AICP, PP, CFM. So I really, my original start was in and around Sandy and coming out of Sandy, working with past Mayor Don Zimmer to develop a comprehensive water management strategy, looking at past impacts going back to Irene and earlier, knowing that we had to deal with rainfall, groundwater, high impervious surfaces, low bulkheads, and a community that was very, very dense and built out, and both very dense and then also an extremely high amount of flood risk. So Ida, we had 70% of the city flooded, Sandy, 75% of the city flooded, Irene, 70% of the city flooded. So we've had Hoboken's history with floodplain management has been checkered. The city itself didn't really begin administering the NFIP program properly until 2010, 11-ish. And then we got on board quickly. So some of the successes that I'm going to discuss right now are born out of necessity, and then also having to really adapt to a dynamic condition where the community demanded progress in a lot of these areas. So coming out of Sandy, the community did a couple of things with planning. We did a green infrastructure strategic plan. We did a green building and environmental sustainability element. And then we engaged in a federally led process through Rebuild by Design that developed a feasibility study, an environmental impact statement, as well as a plan to implement a 4-part water management strategy meant to address coastal storm surge, rainfall related flooding, and shallow urban ponding through a series of coastal levees, pumps, green infrastructure, and parks projects that had storage underneath them. And coming out of the gate from Sandy, as well as trying to marry some of our ambitions with fundable projects, we didn't and haven't implemented the biggest projects first. We kind of chipped away at the smallest ones. So we did a $400,000 project around City Hall that had rain gardens and downspout disconnects and cisterns. And we did a block scale intervention that was kind of the lowest cost and highest visibility in the city. That generated community interest. It was part of our planning process. And our planning process kind of laid out these incremental steps we could take to start achieving bigger projects. Our planning process that we went through coincided with a referendum to introduce an open space tax, which ended up becoming kind of like the seed money that we were using to finance portions of our projects through the infrastructure bank at the state of New Jersey, and taking the seed money we had from the referendum, putting it into the iBank, gave us additional cost savings. And after the City Hall project, we started to do green infrastructure and pedestrian safety projects throughout the city. Did a few different acquisitions on the western side of the city, where a $12 million project for a 1-acre park that had subsurface storage and surface green infrastructure, a $30 million partnership with a developer for a park at 7th and Jackson, which was 4 acres, which again had the same green infrastructure, surface, storage, subsurface. And now we're under construction on our Northwest Resiliency Park, which is a $80 million project over 6 acres. We received $10 million in brick funding. And the Building Resilience and Community Program, what I understand is looking to some of the resilient NJ projects to develop feeders into that program with Chris Testa's group. So the state of New Jersey, as I understand it, is starting to align this kind of planning process, project development process with more formalized plans, and then ultimately connecting that into federal funding that we know is available. The last thing I'll say about kind of building on those smaller successes into larger ones is that there is a point where we exhaust some of the funding mechanisms, but we've worked together to build partnerships across different agencies. So state green acres, county green acres, philanthropic donations, funding from federal agencies. My point is that each one of our project, both development and financing, we look to develop as broad of a team and cast as wide of a net in our partnerships, because ultimately you vest other agencies in the success of the project, but you also get support in that you don't have to carry the whole thing yourself. So whether it's DEP being a partner on our giant project, which is Rebuild by Design, which is a $230 million project, which is going to reduce storm surge, or if it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to provide $200,000 to do a pre-design analysis and a feasibility study on one of the projects. We kind of attack the project from a lot of different sides. And I want to be careful with my time. So I think that the last thing I want to talk about is some of our experiences coming out of Sandy and into Ida. We've got Yasmin's on our team, and she's our environmental planner. She's participating in leading for us on the Resilient NJ project, but she's also working on 2 other projects right now. The first is we, at the council meeting on Wednesday, we passed a stormwater utility feasibility study. And the second project that we're working on is 2014, I think, either 2014 or 2016, we passed a code and an ordinance that was called the Building Resilience Design Guidelines. And that kind of straightened out the NFIP Uniform Construction Code and state requirements for design and construction in the coastal floodplain. It had typologies for types of retrofits, materials, the process. And what we learned in Ida is that new construction or substantial rehabilitation was not really the core group impacted by rainfall related flash flooding from a lot of different vectors. So people had flooding come in from their roofs, people had flooding come in from their backyards, people had flooding come in from their under drains, people had flooding come in from their streets, and people had flooding come back from our combined sewer system into their homes. So we're assembling a team of plumbers and code officials and architects and engineers to develop a Building Resilience Design Guidelines 2.0. It's kind of shorthand of what we're calling it. I think that there might be an acronym, but to look at what can individuals do to retrofit their buildings to be climate prepared for these, seemingly more frequent high intensity rainfall events, and not have it be a requirement like the other design guidelines we developed, but more as a recommendation, a best practices guide, because our community has said, we have no idea where to start. We have no idea what to do. We don't feel safe. We've heard that this is the city's responsibility to fix these issues. And our approach from Sandy till now has really been comprehensive, non-site specific, right of way or public property led investments, whether that's our pumping stations that we're working with Hudson on, or if it's our park projects or the right of way. We tried to do programs that disassociated risks for the general population, but did not necessarily focus on what should be done for the individual home. So that's kind of like what we're taking as the next step. And my alarm went off to limit myself to 10 minutes. I could talk for 50 hours about this, and I'm fascinated by the work that everyone here does, and I'm excited to hear the other panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Caleb. That was a great presentation, really was. And I think all three of you are going to bring into the play exactly how important it is to network with everybody. And that's crucial, and to look at multiple funding sources. We want to move along now to Tom Flynn. Tom, thank you very much, and please proceed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone for having me. And Caleb, that was great, and a really good segue to a lot of things that I think we're all going to touch on today. So I'm going to share a few slides just to keep on track. So as it was mentioned, and thanks, Ed, for that, environmental specialist and floodplain administrator and CRS coordinator for Woodbridge Township, and I have the pleasure and honor to work with Mayor McCormick and Carolyn Ehrlich, our chief of staff, on a lot of the sustainability projects that we work on. But really just a quick high-level overview of Woodbridge, right? So we're over 24 square miles, tidal and fluvial floodplains, over 3,000 acres of special flood hazard area, 2 watersheds, 9 sub-watersheds, and a whole lot of water, right? So, and kind of what that alludes to over time and the age of the community, over 350 years old, is that we never saw water always as just something to manage, right? It used to be a resource. Folks used to come to Boynton Beach. It was one of the first coastal retreat areas in the late 1800s. And it was a place where folks came before automobiles. They came by boat from Staten Island, and it was a destination, right? So, you know, I guess the question is what happened, right? So we see monuments now, and just to orient yourself, that's where Boynton Beach is. And that's where the Watson-Crampton floodplain is. That's been talked about a lot in the last 10 years or so since Sandy. So Superstorm Sandy reached a tidal elevation of about 12.5 feet above sea level in the lower Woodbridge River adjacent to that neighborhood. Ground elevations there range between about 6 and 8 feet above sea level. So to give you a sense of the inundation that those folks saw was extreme, to say the least. So we've seen these maps, right? Everyone in this room, can kind of understand that, we need to stop calling these things a wake-up call. It's not a warning. It's not a once-in-a-lifetime event. And what I love about talking to folks about these kinds of events, especially in New Jersey, is that these storms hit everyone in such a different way, and they resonate in such a different manner. So if we're going to stop calling it a warning and stop telling folks that it's once in a lifetime, what do we have to say? How do we have to communicate this to our communities? So we have to plan like nature has no memory. We have to stop calling the 100-year storm event something that nature is going to remember 100 years from now. And we have to implement like time has no heart. It does not care. Time does not care that we did not mitigate yesterday. We need to mitigate now. What does that look like? So, Caleb talked a lot about complete streets and cisternes and rain gardens and how to make, places of interest become a more resilient community, right? So this is a conceptual design for a complete street that's been fully engineered, and we're excited to move it to build out in the next probably 6 to 9 months in spring and fall. And for folks on the call that know me from past lives, right? So other things that we're considering, especially along Boynton Beach, and to bring back that sense of place at Boynton Beach, are living shorelines. These are not answers to Sandy, but they do help with coastal habitat, and they do help with nuisance flooding and erosion. So we now have rain gardens at every branch library within the township. I don't think I need to go into what green infrastructure is with the folks on this call, but it's important to note that they're at every branch library because we want to make it educational. We want to have folks better understand why we're doing this and have talks at these places to better educate folks as to what green infrastructure is and why there's not just an additional catch basin or pipe put in the ground at these locations that we know are flooded. So getting back to the education point, we work a lot with the schools on designs for, how and why things drain to our waterways. This was a drawing and a sketch that was done by one of our local students. And now we're starting to build that out to more and more catch basins within the town, which are over 2,000. So a lot of students have a lot of fun. So, Caleb touched on Ida, and, one of the things that we do here is we look at problem sites. So we have choke points within our system. We know that we have over 56 of them. Anytime we have 2.5 inches of rainfall predicted or more, we have our DPW folks go out, who are amazing, and go around with GPS analysis and kind of point out specifically, is there a tree limb down? Is there debris? Is the basin failing? So what do we have to do to better manage that? Now, Ida was a completely different kind of anomaly, right? So, Irene was almost the exact duplicate of a design storm event of about 10, 11 inches of rainfall over 24 hours. Ida was 9 to 10 inches of rainfall over 6 hours, so a quarter of the time. So what does that look like? So that's what it looked like in Woodbridge, and it looks a lot like it did during Irene and Sandy. So, it kind of made us all remember Sandy again, because as folks know that are not involved in floodplain management, you tend to forget quickly. So, we started these conversations after Sandy, thankfully, about, understanding that there's a 1% annual chance storm event. We talked to folks about what advisory-based flood elevations mean and how preliminary firms are developed and how they're regulated, and what restoring the shore means here in Woodbridge. So we met with the groups, different community groups after Superstorm Sandy, and we took a look at what to do next, right? So we wanted to make sure that we got the most vulnerable folks out of harm's way. We did that through planning processes, right? So we looked specifically, this is through a DCA grant, at how to go about doing that. How do we manage to get folks out of harm's way? And I know a lot of times it's called managed retreat, but our mayor loves to call it an attack. And I think that's great, because who wants to retreat, right? We need to attack this problem. So that's what we did. So again, just to orient ourselves, the Watson Crimson floodplain. And what are we really talking about? So we've talked about the dynamics of flooding. Caleb really touched on that really well. And we'll talk a little bit about building infrastructure and damage, but the last bullet point gets looked over a lot. So compromising sensitive natural areas that, 300 years ago, it was farmland, it was floodplains. And I get asked a lot, what's the difference between a flood zone and a floodplain? And, flood zones are regulatory. Floodplains are supposed to flood. They're going to flood. They're indicative of hydric soils. They're indicative of hydrophytic vegetation, hydrology. It's going to happen. We have to manage for it. So how do we do that? So we already had a great partnership with Rutgers, Dr. Brooke Maslow and her team, and Kathleen Kerwin at the Cooperative Extension Station. So they were already giving beautiful tours at one of our nature preserves before Sandy. So we met with them and talked about what we can do next. How do we start to re-establish the floodplain? So this is an image of a planting project just this past fall to a restored forested wetland area, fully permitted by DEP. It's a 2.5 acre area. But this is just one example of a broader project, right? So, and a big piece of this is explaining to folks that restoration doesn't look sexy for the first couple of years, right? So these trees are going to look beautiful, but they need to understand why we're doing it and what the long-term goals are. So a cross section of what those long-term goals are, right? We want to be able to have folks that feel comfortable, that stay, but have a buffer between them and the reality that they're facing. So in doing that, we look at, modifying human susceptibility to flooding and damage. Well, how do you do that? So we rezoned this area. We call it an open space conservation and resiliency zone. Any new building is not permitted. Existing construction must be elevated. So that's what we look at, right? So those are kind of our bullet points for, OSCR zone open space management, right? So what does that look like? It looks a lot like the Unified National Program for Floodplain Management. These aren't new concept, folks, but we need to implement them. And I know everyone on this call wants to do that and is doing that. And it's just a matter of how it makes sense for the right community. So we're looking at all these same factors. We're all looking at repetitive flooding, adaptive management, and flood insurance as risk rating 2.0 comes in. So what does that mean? We look at the mapping, we look at how to regulate it, and we got to keep looking at flood insurance because unfortunately, homes that were built in 1920 with basements, we need to have a heart and understand that. And it really equates to the three-legged stool of the NFIP. So for the folks that stay, like I said, we want to make sure that they're educated. We want to make sure that they know their flood hazard. We want to make sure that they understand what goes into a flood insurance study report, floodway data, profiles, that it all correlates to not what's abstract art, but actuarial risk. We need folks to understand where they're living, what they're buying, and how important it is to better understand the floodplain. What about the other locals that stay, right? Our invasive species, our persistent species. So we keep managing for biodiversity and flood storage, and we keep working with our partners at Rutgers. So just this past fall, like I said, over 4,000 native trees and shrubs were installed. We have a trail development going on right now within that area, and it's set to have a ribbon cutting there in the spring, and just can't wait to have you all out there. So, like I said, you know, these are old problems, folks. We all know it, right? But we need to start. We need to start moving the needle, and it starts with us. And I'm excited to hear everyone else's thoughts. So thanks.
A great presentation.
Thank you very much, Tom. And that was another great presentation following Caleb's. And I think the two of you, and especially in your presentation, you pointed out and augmented what Caleb said about how extensive the concept resiliency is and all the different areas of it, and the importance of doing some planning and assessment before you begin in order to make certain you're accounting for all the residual effects that may come about. So thank you very much. And I will point out that once again, we're seeing that these three towns and the personnel representing them reach out and get involved with our academia, with our research institutions, with our other communities, with our county, with national organizations, and with the legislative operations in their local town, the county, and the state. And that's very important, just to have a comprehensive project that has multiple funding layers. So thank you, Tom. And now we'll move along to Angela Andersen and from Long Beach Township. And I think you're going to be very surprised here because Long Beach Township is just not one little community. It's a very expansive community, and the needs of that community are very exponential based on where you are in Long Beach Township. So thank you, Angela.
Thanks. How's my volume?
Your volume's fine.
I'm fine. Okay. Thanks. I'm not gonna pull up my slides. Just kind of looking at the, who we have on the call. A lot of you were hand in hand with me, Becky and Nick, way back when. So again, I'm Angela Andersen. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator of Long Beach Township. Long Beach Township is one of the 6 towns on Long Beach Island in the southern part of Ocean County. So 6 towns on 18 miles, and Long Beach Township is 12 non-contiguous miles of Long Beach Island. So just in that alone, grasping on how you plan and manage for resilience, our town alone being, you have to go through every other town on the island to get to all parts of Long Beach Township. We reach tip to tip from High Bar Harbor to our southernmost section in Holgate. I've been with Long Beach Township for 10 years, but go way back a lot of years, Martha and some others on the call for a very long time. It's a gift to me to be able to live and work in my community. And I started here back in my roots, counting bottles and cans. Certified recycling professional. I was in the first class in 1997. So that's what got me to Long Beach Township after, I was coming back into the workforce after my second son was born. So, when we were first coming into using these words in our municipality, resilience, sustainability, they weren't on the map. They weren't things we were talking about before Sandy came along. A couple of my colleagues Lisa Auermuller, really just before Sandy came, they said, you know, these are some things we really want to start looking at. We weren't on the hook here yet, but we knew that responsible planning was our responsibility, right, to our community. All we needed was something like Sandy to say, what were those words again? What were we trying to do right before Sandy? And then it became, how do we use these words in a not scary way, right? It's irresponsible to, as a municipality, as a public servant, to not plan, you know, for a safe future for your community. So that's when we started our terminologies. They really came into play after Sandy in a very responsive and reactive way. And that's fine. But we've shifted, right? We shift to reactionary, what the word resilience meant to us. Human capacity was our biggest goal, right? So human resilience, getting our community safe, getting everybody home, getting our businesses back in order. Unfortunately, what came with that was getting the same pipes in the ground, getting the same buildings in the same location. You know, everybody had to go higher. So in that, we said, all right, we're going to let go of the side and rear setbacks. And then what do you end up with that? You lift your head after a couple of years and say, what have we done? In letting those leveled out restrictions go to allow the person that has raised their home to get back into their home, we have caused a catastrophe. But again, this is not malice and intent. It was get you home, get you up. In order to get you up, we got to get you wider, right? Because you can't get a ladder to go into your house. You're going to need landings and steps and all this. So there went the setbacks and the height restrictions. But that was a knee-jerk reaction on a human level. And that was what our main goal was. So we shifted gears there. But when it came to all those words again and what we were doing, we quickly stepped right into getting to resilience. Just Long Beach Township did getting to resilience in 2014. Becky and Nick were there side by side with us early on through JC Nair with Lisa Auermuller. We knew that we had to be resilient, but we also knew we couldn't only be resilient. You got 6 towns, and that's when the coastal vulnerability assessment came in, and Owen and Little and Associates, our municipal engineer, are the same municipal engineer for all the towns on the island. So you can't just be resilient in Long Beach Township, you got to be resilient on the whole island. And that was when a regional coastal vulnerability assessment was completed with our municipal engineer. And I believe, you know, in the chat later, I think it was the first regional one on that scale, that where every town on the island was like, we all are going to face the same risks on some level. Now, when you looked at how Sandy hit our island, so different from High Bar Harbor and Barnegat Light. Basically, Barnegat Light was like, there was a storm and Holgate got crushed. So there was a lot of differences just in the range of the community. So everybody's vulnerable in different ways. You know, we have 2 towns that are right at our bridge, Surf City and Ship Bottom. They are our route out of here. Different issues there. They have a state highway coming in, and then we have a county road running down the middle, our backbone of our community. So there's a lot of complications there, right? But we, again, utilizing these words, looking at those partnerships and what we needed to do. So we really had to start getting creative. And that's when, you know, you start to, you know, we had joined Sustainable Jersey in 2009 before all of this. You know, and that became a roadmap, and that kind of led us in and through Sandy. Everything that's laid out in the Sustainable Jersey actions really kind of led us through to even where we are today. And we're very lucky to have something like that. So that learning from other communities and seeing what they're doing. We joined the New Jersey Coastal Coalition. That was kicked into gear after Sandy. And it was like exactly what you need. You need to look at each of these coastal towns up and down the coast and how they're approaching things. Right after Sandy, so kind of looking at the speakers ahead of me and the scalability of what we're doing. You know, we're a lot different than Woodbridge and Hoboken, but yet we're all the same. Right after Sandy, we were able to adopt an open space trust. So that was in 2013. And immediately we're like, you know, we got crushed on our public access and we need to make sure that we have that. We have our oceanfront public access, our bayfront public access. We need to secure these parcels so that we don't lose that, you know, in the next storm. Immediately, everything is beach replenishment, dune revegetation, and that is fantastic. But we knew we had to look west. We have to say, where do you think that the damage really came from? We have to say, what is happening in our back bay? So in our open space trust, it's 1 penny on every $100 of assessed value. We would do a parcel a year, a waterfront parcel. Public access became #1. Get people engaged in the bay. And the more you know about the bay, the more you fall in love with the bay, the more you understand why we have to protect the bay. So we would do a parcel a year. And some of them also became parking lots only because with the beach replenishment, we had to provide, you know, public services. We had to have parking, we had to have, you know, rest areas and things like that. And Love Ladies, North Beach, if you guys have ever been in those areas, you're like, there's a way to get to the beach up here. You know, there really it's very unclear in those parts of our town. And it was very important to have public access to those beaches, especially once replenished. So we were able to buy a parcel. And at the time in North Beach, able to take that house, and we actually housed all the beach replenishment crew before we made it a parking lot for our public to be able to access those beaches. So in shifting our gears, doing all of these incremental things, getting associated with all these things, Resilient New Jersey became available to us back in 2017, 2018. And we knew from our CVA process that we were a shoo-in. This was the next step in where we need to be resilient. And I think that is one of the other things I have in common with our other participants on this call. We're all one of the regional teams, within one of the regional teams for Resilient NJ. So, you know, in getting that kind of designation, that again, that was all 6 towns and a community organization, St. Francis Community Center. Again, 6 towns, 18 miles, comprehensive, equitable planning, you know, can be a challenge. So between that sort of thought, what's equitable, resilient work on a barrier island, and our open space trust, how many parcels can you buy on land, right? We did buy a 22-acre parcel in cost share with our Ocean County Natural Land Trust in our Holgate section. That was a real big win. I think that was the largest parcel. And I see Marcus on the call. But what that led us to was we don't have a lot on our island side. And that drove us to look at the Bay Islands in our bay. And in 2019, we established in partnership with many of the people on the call, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Stockton, Barnegat Bay Partnership, Nature Conservancy. We've established the New Jersey Bay Island Initiative. And in that collaborative, we have inventoried every Bay Island from Manasquan Inlet to Absecon Inlet and created a Bay Island restoration planner tool to help prioritize those islands, see how those islands have behaved and see their potential for restoration. And then just last week, in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, Monmouth University, Stockton University, and the other partners, we received a NIFWIF grant, and that will enable us to look at 5 Bay Islands off of Long Beach Township and utilize that Bay Island restoration planner to design restoration for 5 islands off of Long Beach Township. So to me, that's good for everybody. That's good for our region. That's good for New Jersey. Just to be the leading force in this team of people to say, you know, this is what we're doing. So we really look forward to developing the Bay Island restoration concept. But stemming off of that, 2 things that I'll end with are Oyster shell recycling program that we established in 2017. We partnered, Caleb, I see you have a Jetty shirt on, so thank you for that. So we partnered with Jetty and the Jetty Rock Foundation, Stockton University, to collect all the oyster and clam shells from our raw bars and restaurants on Long Beach Island. And it's just bay, it's for bay restoration. Right now, all of our shell goes to the Tuckerton Research Reef. But the plan is that this material that we're collecting becomes a restoration material, just like
Good.
you would have.
Jetty's using it for all clothing. So this is like an Oyster
Yeah,
shirt
that's the
and a
Oyster shirt, yeah.
jacket. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're done with it, we'll just throw it in the bay. So the material, we are going to collect our own material for bay restoration. And that is a pioneering thing. There's no other municipality that I know of that's doing this, but the state of New Jersey is doing it down in Atlantic City, collecting shell, literal societies collecting shell. And Megan, I'm pretty sure down by you, it's just a given that shell does not go in a landfill down in your area. But the other thing, and I'd like to invite all of you to, is our new facility that we did use our open space money for, that is going to be the anchor for all of our resilience and sustainability work, is our new Long Beach Township Marine Education Field Station in our Holgate section. We acquired the property of Old Bowie 77 Marina. We have a lab space downstairs, meeting space upstairs. We put a public access kayak drop off across the street. And it's adjacent to Clam Cove Reserve, the property that we bought with Ocean County, and which is also on top of the list for our Bay Island restoration. So it's a lot of creativity. I'm over time. I'll stop talking because I know everybody wants to talk within. Again, we could all talk for a week straight. Those are just some of the highlights, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be on the call with all of you. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Angela. That was sensational. You were the cleanup hitter today, and I think you did a great job of bringing everything together. And I especially liked, and I'm sure our audience members did too, the way you just laid out the process of how you got started. And just as the other speakers mentioned, you started small and addressed, getting through recovery, then get into planning for resilience and sustainability, and the tremendous amount of support you engendered from all types of public and private agencies at every level to help you with the science, to help you with the planning, and then most importantly, to get the project implemented with the money. So that was really great. And you brought together something we talked about on the preparation call, which was that all three of these presenters have been very involved with the number of agencies and the number of projects, the Resilient NJ, the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative, which is sponsoring this call today, and also Sustainable Jersey and Sustainable Jersey for Schools. So thank you very much. And there's many more on top of that. So at this point, we're going to go back to Tom and Laura, because we're going to have our question, answer, and discussion session.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. And thank you, Caleb, Tom, and Angela. They were great presentations, and I hope inspire some good questions. If you'd like to ask a question, I would ask that you raise your hand if you know how to do that in the reactions tab at the bottom, and we'll get to your questions. You can come off mute and ask your question if you would like to do that. If you'd rather not be on camera and ask a question, you're welcome to put questions in the chat as well. And Laura will monitor the chat for questions. Do we have any questions, Laura? No. Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. So there's plenty of opportunity to ask questions.
I have a question for Angela, if that's okay.
Sure.
So when you started the Oyster program, did the municipality go directly to restaurants and businesses, or was there existing organization that you leveraged into that partnership?
We started the Oyster recycling program after the release of the Oyster Farmers film in June of 2017. The call to action, that film is about the oyster resurgence in Barnegat Bay, Little Egg Harbor estuary. And in the tail end of that film, we focus on a pilot project that was happening with the American Littoral Society and the Old Causeway restaurant in Manahawkin, picking up shells, seeing if it would work out. taking it to Stockton, and Stockton had just gotten money from the Barnegat Bay Partnership to establish a research reef off of Tuckerton. And it was a pilot, and there was a lot of holes in how do you make something like this work. And I produced the film, but that was like on the side. But my mayor was like, we'll pick up shell. And because the problems with shell are who's picking it up and where you're putting it. I think we have 1 million restoration projects that we could line up. That doesn't seem to be a problem anymore, but who's going to pick it up and where are you going to put it? Long Beach Township decided to fill that void. We made a contract with each restaurant because you cannot, if they put it out at the curb, it is municipal solid waste. When you have an agreement directly to the restaurant owner, we're taking their material from them as for a beneficial reuse, and that helps us usurp any of that handling and transportation problems. So since 2017, we've averaged about 2,000 bushels a season, and we have 15 restaurants. And this season we hope to have drop-offs, because now with the COVID takeout model, people are looking for drop-off locations.
Great. So I see Nick Angeron has his hand up, and Megan, we'll start with Nick, and Megan, you'll go next.
Everybody, great presentations, guys. Even knowing most of what you're doing, it's always impressive to hear it when it's all laid out in one place. It really is a pleasure working with every one of your communities. So my question is, or potentially questions, so everything that you are doing, has that resulted from kind of what I'll term a strategic planning process that has kind of resulted in these actions? Or, I'm kind of overgeneralizing at extremes here, or has it been more of a kind of jumping at opportunities as they arise?
I very simply answer to that is yes. It's trying to think strategically, but then also seizing every opportunity that comes in our favor. So I'll give you an example of that. Block 12 was a project in Southwest Hoboken, which was a community-led process that took 10 years to get the first acre of green space in Southwest Hoboken. And it wasn't until after we had built the park that Academy Bus approached us and they said, do you want to buy our property? We'd like to sell it to you, and we would like to include a reduction in the price to seed a redevelopment plan that we want to do on another parcel. So the answer to that was yes, we'll do more green space. Yes, we're going to add additional subsurface retention, and we're in design for that project now. And it's another project that Yasmin's working on. We didn't necessarily anticipate it, but I think that proximity and expansion are something that, even if it's not part of a strategic plan, the idea of improving it, expanding, we'll always try and find the money. We're just going to say yes until we're not able to say yes. So great question.
Is that Angela, Tom, is that different for you guys?
Yeah, Nick, I concur with Caleb, and I think it's, it really depends on the project too, right? So, like, for instance, all of our green infrastructure work, most of it is funded in-house. We meet monthly. We have the pleasure to work with Chris Abrupto, who I'm sure everyone knows, and yeah, so we've been kind of just plugging away at that. We plan in the winter, we implement in the spring and fall every year. That's been our mantra. And a lot of it came out of a strategic planning process through the impervious surface cover analysis, but it also comes through, like you had mentioned, these advantageous opportunities through grants, partnerships with schools, Sustainable Jersey, right? So it all kind of comes together when you connect the dots. Just kind of being nimble enough to, seize the moment, right?
Angela's just nodding. I'll assume agreement across the board there. Thanks, guys.
So Megan, you want to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. And kudos to the presenters. And, it's like Nick said, it's always I'm blown away by all the work that everybody's doing. And Angela mentioned the use of the open space funds for public access, and that was really from a resilience perspective, I think. And I'm wondering, there's a lot of discussion about having municipalities have skin in the game in the funding mechanism for resilience. And a lot of counties have their penny for open space. And, there's a lot of, that's putting skin in the game in the open space scenario. And I wonder if the trend is happening for open space to be primarily, maybe not primarily, but to be focused on resiliency. And what about that next step for engineered projects and other resiliency projects? Is there an appetite for dedicating and maybe adding another penny for resiliency? I mean, communities really, this is what's happening for the future. There's going to need to be more engagement in this arena. What do you think the appetite is for that? And is that a realistic plan for most communities to be doing more of these projects?
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Megan. Well, yeah, so I think, even at the county, I think even recently, Ocean County kind of redefined what they mean by when you have an open space tax and trust. And it's in how you define what that can be utilized for. So you kind of have a little bit of leverage there as a community or a county or a region to say what is it you're going to use that for. It's an open space, and you use the word recreation, and I'm always kind of like, I mean, if we put another pickleball court, I'm going to just jump off the whatever. But it does become like how you're defining what that means to you. But I do think the appetite is there, and I think if we start together with everybody that's on this call, if you look at who's on here, we start saying that's what that is. This is a resiliency trust. Just like ultimately down the road, we're going to need resiliency permitting. We're going to need to be expediting some of these permit things and the things that we need. And if we start using that terminology as a group, that drives regulatory changes and things like that. Like, and we talked about it. Do I need a CAFA permit for every pump that I want to put in? Do I, some blanket things, because we have emergency money. Caleb brought up a couple of good examples on our pre-call yesterday. If a bridge goes down somewhere, it could take a year to get back up. But if it's a coastal evacuation route, right? Isn't that what you said, Caleb? It goes, so the resiliency permitting and expediting things. I think if we do that jointly, we'll be in a good place.
Thank you.
Tom or Caleb want to add anything to Angela's answer? No.
Tough to follow greatness. I completely agree.
Okay, so Wayne, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to ask? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Question for Angela and a question for Tom. Angela, you said when you elevated the buildings, you had unintended consequences. Can you go into that a little bit more? And then for Tom, since you've been studying your impervious surface, have you set a benchmark of what percentage of the whole town you do not want to exceed? And is there some incentive you can give people in the town to unpave or undevelop their sites to give you more pervious surface?
Hi, Wayne, how are you? Yeah, so, well, after Sandy, we knew I was in charge of the, hazard mitigation projects, and, people were thinking we were giving money away, like I was a human ATM. And that was tough. So people are like, we need the money, we got to go up. And they wanted to increase, they wanted their ICC money, like that was another ATM opportunity, which now we're seeing maybe a problem. But we're like, okay, you got crushed, we got to get you up. So in order to get you up, we're going to have to change our height restrictions because you might exceed it. To get into your house, you're going to need to widen, right? We get that you're going to have to put landings. So the side and rear setbacks, we, paused. And before you know it, you have now these really big houses very close together, and the lot coverage on 100 by 50 by 100 lot now. And then when you finally lift your head up a few years later, you realize, okay, well, we got to stop pausing. We got to go back for variances. And that's where what I meant when I had said that where we went down with that.
Yeah, so Wayne, I think that's a great question. And so there are metrics for that, right? So we have identified those metrics. In a 350-year-old community that's essentially built out, it's a tough go. I'm not going to lie to anyone on this call, and I think everyone knows that. But one of the things that we started doing about 9 months ago, we've embarked on a watershed master plan. So I know a lot of folks love the CRS. I'm one of them. A lot of folks hate it. They think it incentivizes floodplain development. I think for the foreseeable future, there will be floodplain development, and we need to do it correctly, right? So a watershed master plan is one of the prerequisites to get from a class 5 to a class 4. What it does on the internal level and on the external level, it looks at design storm events down to a 10-year and a 2-year storm event on particular individual properties. So if there's a single family house going up, we're looking at design storm runoff now at a 2-year period, right? So it's going to significantly impact what we do and how we do it. So we're developing those mechanisms now, and we're considering everything from some type of impervious fee, right, associated with that. So and how that might be implemented to other types of mechanisms that would funnel into potential buyouts in the future. So we're still kind of working through that, but I encourage folks to take a look at it. I mean, it's tough. 24 square miles, 2 watersheds, 9 sub watersheds, but at the same time, we know our problem areas, right? So we're looking at the problem areas first, right? So like Caleb has pointed out, break this down. Don't take giant chunks at a time. We already know where our problem areas are. So we're studying those first. We're looking at the drainage, and we're looking at where we know the repetitive loss areas are. And a lot of the repetitive loss areas, just like FEMA always says, are outside the floodplain. So why? We need to know why, and we need to mitigate it.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you for the question, Wayne. And we are now out of time. We're over time, I think. So I would like to once again thank the panelists that presented today, and the participants for the questions and listening intently. We will post a recording, this recording, on our collaborative webpage, and we'll send that out to all the registrants so you can have it to look at again if you wanted to catch something you may have missed or take down notes. And we also will be planning our 3rd coffee chat meeting for February. So look for another announcement in the new year, and we hope to see you again. So thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thanks
Bye.
so much, Tom.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
all. Have a nice week.